Well, good afternoon. Lovely to see you all here this afternoon at the Velo Park. Fantastic place to get to, and Stratford station was the busiest station in the UK up to, I think, March 21. So very well connected. Doesn't have a tram yet, but it's well connected. So very quickly, I'll run through what we're about. We're looking at the tram solution for the Thames Estuary area. And I'm not quite sure what's happened to all the points on here. I'm sure that they're here somewhere. Sorry, you can tell I'm not technically that able. But essentially, what we're looking at here with the Thames Estuary, we can see this on the larger map, the population densities. The area that we're looking at is relatively highly populated on both sides of the river, on the Essex side and on the North Kent side. It's traditionally where a lot of the industry has been based, going down the River Thames, and there is still a very high population, as you can see from there. And there are very good east-west rail services. You've got metro services along the South Essex side, as a lot of you know. You've got the C2C line that goes through Grays through to London with Fenchurch Street. You've got the C2C line that goes through Upminster. These are essentially metro services. They run very, very frequently. And in the North Kent area, you also have a relatively well-served east-west connectivity with good services provided by South Eastern and Thameslink, very frequent services. And you also now have the high-speed services which run through from Ebbsfleet up to London, and also in the other direction out into Kent. And yes, I'm very hopeful that we can get Eurostar persuaded that this will be a very good place to restart the continental services. I'm due to go down to Spain next week. I'm going down to Barcelona. I'll be in Barcelona for 7:30 in the evening, time for tapas. However, what I've got to do now, I've got to go into London and then come back out again, because those trains that I would normally catch to the continent aren't stopping at Ebbsfleet. And it's also worth noting at this point that the major destination from Southend Airport is actually Amsterdam. Well, do we know any other forms of transport that run to Amsterdam? A few high-speed trains just need to stop and pick up passengers. That would be very useful. Now, in the area, the problem that we've got is that there's very little existing cross-river public transport. You've got an hourly bus, which is run by Ensign Bus, and you have a ferry. The ferry used to be very well used. Millions of passengers a year used to use the ferry. It was the way you'd get across the river. But through cutbacks of the rail services on the North Kent side, back from Gravesend West, and from cutback on rail connectivity on the north side down to Tilbury Riverside, the ferry service is really just a shadow of its former self, and it's actually now very difficult to get to. Despite that, people are still using the ferry, and you get on the ferry and you've got a few dozen people, and they are making the effort to get around the difficulty of trying to access the piers, but there's still a demand there. But in the past, there were millions of people using that crossing. The other important thing to note is the number of people within the catchment of that area that we're looking at as the hub of what we're doing. It's 1.5 million people. If that area of the Thames Estuary was a city, it would be one of the top 5 cities in the UK. One of the top 5 cities, but you can't actually very easily get across this big river in the middle. So you've got a city of two halves. It's very weird. And those who can drive will drive. Those who can't drive, tough. You can't get to work. You can't get to medical appointment. You can't get to the school. It's a major problem. And we've got things such as people being referred to the Dartford Valley Hospital in North Kent from Thurrock. They've got to get a lift from a friend if they don't drive, or they've got to get a taxi, and the taxi is not just 2 journeys. They get a taxi from Thurrock to the hospital in the north of Kent. It's a taxi out, the taxi goes back, the taxi comes back to collect them, the taxi goes back. So we're well over 50 million journeys on the Dartford crossing at the moment. And the result locally is a huge amount of congestion. You can spend half an hour just trying to travel a mile or two, trying to get to the Dartford crossing, and that could be on either side. And if there's an incident, around 300 incidents a year, what do? Well, I do the journey, and sadly, I have on quite a few occasions used a car. So you always have plan B. What? I'm sorry, Andrew. The rail services are improving, but so you always have to have a plan B. So my personal plan B, if I'm going southbound, I stop at the Lakeside Shopping Centre. I have something in the food court. Check the screen. Is the Dartford crossing now clear? I might spend a happy couple of hours, sitting in the food court. Got better things to do with my time. And northbound, if the northbound route is closed on the Dartford crossing, I go to Epsom International Station, hop on the high-speed train, come up to Stratford, and then go back out again. I've done it far too many times, and I wouldn't even try driving into London to go across Rotherhithe or anywhere like that. I could spend a very happy evening until about 10 o'clock at night trying to go that way. So, very, very difficult, very, very painful trying to cross the river, but it's in the centre of an area that's got the population of a major city. So, big disconnect. And what's also come through when we've been working with the local authorities and local plans, there is a need to get people to jobs from the south side of the river. There's more people than jobs. On the north side of the river, it's exactly the opposite. There are more jobs than there are people to fill those jobs. And the sort of jobs that we're talking about are not the jobs where people are going to be able to afford a car, let alone want to run a car or spend a couple of hours going across the Dartford crossing every day and getting caught up in traffic, etc., etc. And it's a big issue. And we deal with the bus operators on both sides. An Ensign bus on the northern side, we ask them, can you recruit from the south side of the river? Well, no, we can't get any. We can't recruit anybody from the south side of the river. It's just not reliable enough. So we have employers on the north side can't employ people from the south side. People on the south side can't employ people on the north side. So major disconnect there of a very densely populated area. This slide I put in. This is one of those diagrams. This shows the levels of deprivation. The dark blue areas or purple areas are in the lowest decile. It's not just the north where people are living that don't have access to cars, who need jobs, who need. I'm not too keen on the phrase levelling up, but you get the drift. So we've got areas there that are in the bottom decile, and part of the reason they're in the bottom decile for within the country is that they don't have connectivity. They can't get to the jobs. They can't get around, and it's a major mismatch there. And this really just highlights the jobs and workers aspect. And this is why we've got areas of deprivation. Again, it's connectivity, it's getting people to where they need to get to for work or for shopping or schools, etc., etc. And there's a big disconnect. And I mentioned earlier about the ferry taking millions of passengers in the past. Well, of course, all of that's been disconnected because the rail line to Tilbury Tilbury Riverside is gone. The rail connectivity on the south side is gone. So it's an absolute means to ferry. So, looking in a bit more detail at the work that we've undertaken, we've got an outline there of our routing in terms of a tramway that would hit all the necessary nodes for transport, for population growth, and for opportunities. It's an urban area. You're not going through countryside anywhere on this. This is all urban. A lot of it is it's industrial. A lot of it is terraced houses. There are a lot of people. And the sort of people that live there, the residents that live there, a lot of them don't have access to a car. You look at the last census information, less than 50% of households in a lot of those areas don't have access to a car. And even on the new developments, all of the yellow patches there with new apartments, they're all being built to the standard of one car parking space per 2 apartments. You've got thousands of new apartments going up, but there are only enough parking spaces for half the apartments to have a car in the first place. You know, this is public transport. Public transport need is being built into the area. It's being built into the area. Low car ownership I've just touched on. New homes, 1 car space for 2 properties. I think it's forgotten by local authorities what that will mean, and it will mean that the public transport will have to go up a gear. And not only that, population growth in the next 20 years, 30%. You know, these are areas that are targeted for significant population growth in these new apartments where there's 1 parking space for every 2 apartments. My goodness, I hope that there will be sufficient provision for cycling lanes as well, because I know that on these new developments there's 1 cycle parking space per bedroom. So I think we might be going Dutch on this one. So again, what we're looking at in terms of our provision for tramway is it supports the levelling up agenda. What else does it do? Well, often overlooked is the rail angle of this, because there's a lot of existing, very effective, very fast rail connectivity, and our bit is the little green bit there that just gets across the river. It's sort of the missing link between the two. But Network Rail have proposed what they call the Ebbsfleet Southern Rail Link. It's a link of about 2 or 3 kilometres that just makes that connectivity to existing rail lines from Ebbsfleet. And that's also in the Kent County Council plan. But it will open up a full connectivity. Now, what will that do for timing? Well, first of all, what will the tram do? At the moment, to get from one side of the river to the other, it's 30 minutes by car with no jams. And we had our consultants there, our tunnelling consultants, and we were on one side of the river. We said, this is where we think the tunnel's going to go. You know, we need you to have a look at this, undertake a bit of work to see how the feasibility stacks up. It took us an hour to do that journey, and with the tramway, that will take 10 minutes, probably less than 10 minutes just to do that journey. But the best you can do in a car is 30 minutes, because you've got to go up the Dartford crossing round. And I will give a shout out here to our colleagues at Network Rail. In terms of Ebbsfleet to Bromley, the Ebbsfleet Southern Rail Link, remembering it's just 2 or 3 kilometres of track, and it's an upgrade of Ebbsfleet Station. That will turn a journey that currently requires 40 minutes by car, no jams, so think an hour and a half. That's a 20-minute journey by train for the sake of just making the connection there. 3 kilometres from station. It's relatively low cost with a very, very high benefit cost ratio. But what it does do, it means that people can hop on the train. They don't need to spend the 40 minutes absolute minimum driving it. And that will really transform the accessibility to the area. I've put this one in, Merse Tunnel. Hopefully most of you are aware of what a Merse Tunnel is, but put it in anyway. This is not rocket science, it's proven technology. It's used elsewhere quite a lot. The Awesome link between Sweden and Denmark is a good example. And there, it's really providing on the Awesome link, it's rail and road, and the rail element, I think, is being upgraded. I think there's going to be an additional rail connection there, and it's really bringing the two economies together to work as one, which is really helpful. And we've got the Fehmarnbelt link between Denmark and Germany, and that's an 18-kilometre immersed tunnel. And they're European, they're doing the sensible thing, they're doing road and rail. It's not just a road tunnel, it's road and rail. In the same way as the Wilson Link, it's road and rail. Very efficient. Now I was debating whether to include this section because it provides a lot of the background, big picture of what's happening. And it's very relevant to our particular area in the Thames Estuary. It's the relative transport costs, and in the Bus Back Better document that came out, there's this fantastic graph. Although I think the axes are slightly out, and what is shown is the increasing cost of using bus and coach and rail compared to motoring. And the way the graph has been presented, it shows bus and rail going up, and motoring remaining flat. In reality, if you adjusted this for inflation, those lines for bus and rail would be across. They're going up in line with inflation. The big outlier is the cost of motoring, which has been falling in real terms. That is the big difference, and that's highlighted in this graph. So what's happening? Well, I've put a big red line down the middle, which sort of approximates to when things changed. And this goes to the turn of the century. It sounds like ages ago, really, but I was there. Prior to that, you had the Smead report, which goes all the way back to the 1960s, talking about how much does the average driver cost the economy in terms of congestion and accidents and pollution and all the rest of it. And there was this principle that the user should pay. So your car drivers should pay for all the problems that all the cars going on the road will cause. Now that worked well up to about 2000, turn of the century, and pretty much every government of every colour since has said, oh, would we just break that? We'll just give drivers a bit of a discount every single year. What that actually means now, and you can see there that this was the Institute of Fiscal Studies in 2019, that subsidy, by not getting motorists to pay for their usage of the road, that subsidy is costing the tax-paying public almost £20 billion. And that's continued. That's now up to 22, 23 billion pounds of annual subsidy to road users. And if you look at the graph, rail users don't get any benefit, bus users don't get any benefit. It's very precisely targeted at the motoring public. And that is what's happening in the background. That's the big elephant in the room as far as I can see. And then you think, well, why is that subsidy to motorists? Why is that happening? What are the policy objectives of the relative government since the turn of the century? Well, what are the objectives? We're going to increase congestion. That's going to increase economic costs. That's going to increase the cost to the economy. Is that an objective? Not sure. Accidents. Increases the accidents. Killed and seriously injured on our roads. Insurance costs, your motoring insurance costs go up because you've got more cars on the road, more chance of it bumping into other cars. Greenhouse gases, and need I say more on that one? Greenhouse gases, 0.5 and the PM10. So, and that's why I put a question mark on that. I suspect that all governments since the turn of the century haven't really understood what the objectives are that they're trying to achieve by introducing this subsidy. But what we do see, HM government has produced a figure for us. Each additional kilometre driven causes an additional 17 pence of social harm. Well, 17 pence isn't very much, but my God, if you multiply that by the number of cars and the number of kilometres they're driving, that's a huge amount. So that is a big problem, and we see the government talking about where they get money from. Well, over the last 20 years, this is now 22, 23 billion a year. But it's not just the subsidy through this and the fuel duty, it's also the road building. And we heard earlier, 27 billion of road building. Right, so if we use taxpayers' money to encourage more people to drive further, then we've also got to use taxpayers' money to spend an extra £20 billion on the new roads that we've subsidised people to use. Anyhow, so what is the effect of this on our locality? Now, this is where it's very relevant to what we're doing locally. If you have a load of road congestion and people can't actually get around on the roads very much, then apart from a lot of people sitting in their cars, it does actually encourage rail usage, because guess what? You can park your car somewhere, hop on a train and do your journey into wherever you want to get to in a fraction of the time. And what we've actually seen over the last 20 years, when the huge amount of subsidy to motorists has occurred, we've seen the usage of rail increase by around 200%, from 4.3 million passengers on the stations that the tramway is interchanging with, to 15 million. You know, and I personally, I've tried it. I've got stuck in traffic. I thought, what do I do now? I park down a side road, get a train from the station, and I can get into Gravesend far quicker than I could just sitting in my car, just stuck in traffic. So, and I do that on the Essex side as well, but they've got bus lanes, fantastic idea, bus lanes. So when I'm fed up with being stuck in the traffic, I will park down a side road, I'll go to the bus stop, hop on the next bus, and get to where I want to go. You know, and that's what's happening. Now, the sad part about this, the buses, if they haven't got their own segregated routes and they don't have bus lanes, the congestion costs the bus operators through reliability and increasing costs, which then leads to cuts in services, and non-car drivers, far from being levelled up, they're left out. You know, if your bus isn't running, you can't, or your bus gets stuck, you can't get to work, or you can't, you know, it's, and we've seen this recently with various bus cuts, that it's managed economic decline. Hold on a minute. If we weren't paying a subsidy to the motorists to clog up the roads, then we wouldn't need to. The bus that we can see there, that was the new Amazon bus on the south side of the river in North Kent. And that contract was let to an independent local operator. And we saw that bus introduced. It was a 24-hour service. It ran 24 hours, every half an hour, and during rush hours it was every 15 minutes. Fantastic. So it's not a shopper special bus, it's a proper get you to work type bus for Amazon in North Kent. Good idea, damn good idea. What happened? All the subsidies that are being paid to car drivers to increase the amount of congestion meant that the bus couldn't go anywhere. So that bus has now been cancelled. And that is because of the road congestion and all the traffic. So that's what we're trying to deal with locally. So how do we mitigate the effect of the car subsidies? What can we provide as a solution? Trams. Trams are the benefits of rail. We've got a permanent way going across the river there. No cars on it. We can go through. And if with proper planning and proper priority to the tramways, and we've looked at this very, very carefully, and we can identify routes where proper priority can be given to the tram, and not just the cross-river piece. So you get the advantage of rail because you've got your own permanent way. You've got the advantage for car drivers, and there is an advantage for car drivers. If you can get across the River Thames in 10 minutes on the tram rather than spending half an hour driving around, what are you going to do? And also, you take the tram, and it also has the benefit of you don't need to pay for your parking. So if you go to parking in I won't count the shopping centres because they have free parking. That's another question entirely. But if you're in town centre parking, you're going to be paying, I don't know, £10, £12 for a day's parking. Well, hold on a minute. You know, you can have your trip on the tram across the river and have spare change, and guess what? You don't even need to buy a car. So we think that it will be very good locally, and for the car drivers, if you remove traffic from the Dartford crossing and you reduce the amount of traffic on the Dartford crossing, that then becomes more reliable. And it may negate the need for a Lower Thames Road crossing, which is simply there to provide more car space for all these cars that are on the road because they're getting a subsidy from the government, taxpayers, sorry, not. The government hasn't got its own money, it's taxpayers' money that's spending on subsidising the car drivers. This will actually, could well negate the need for a Lower Thames Road crossing. And that will save taxpayers £8-9 billion, something like that. Now, the expected usage is about 20 million journeys a year on the Lower Thames Road crossing. And I did have a slide for the Lower Thames Road crossing. And it is anticipated that there will be about 20 million crossings on the Lower Thames Road crossing. Now, if you take a project that's £9 billion, and that is taking 20 million road crossings, my takeaway to everybody on this is, after this event, go and work out how much capital subsidy that is for one car driver doing a daily commute here and there and back across the river. So one car driver, and make it easy, it's 200 days, say, there and back, so it's 400 crossings. How much are the taxpayers going to provide for that car driver to get across the river? And the answer is more than 100,000 per individual car driver, but I'll leave you to work out the detail because it depends on a lot of other assumptions you want to make, but it's well over 100,000 per car driver. Whilst at the same time, for anybody using a bus, tough, you're not getting across the river, tough. You can do a lot with £100,000 per person. So, that's what we're doing there. My next slide is really just looking at Ebbs Street Central. This is right in the centre of what we're doing. Ebbs Street Central is coming up for development. There's an outline planning submitted, and Ebbs Street Development Corporation, who have submitted this, tells us very usefully, with excellent railway connectivity to London. There are a few places like that, and the rest of the UK, via London. Will be a well-integrated transport hub based on public transport and active travel. Sounds great, doesn't it? Our view is that for the Ebbs Street Development Corporation to achieve its aspiration for Ebbs Street Central East to be a transport hub, it is vital to have both a connected tramway for local connectivity on both sides of the river, this is, and the Ebbs Street Southern Rail Link, which gets you to South London in 20 minutes or so. We see integrated public transport as being absolutely vital. We see the necessity for this at the planning stage in order to open up what's happening here. And we've seen this already with Stratford and Railway, London Overground, and all the rest. We've seen it with Canary Wharf, with the provision of Dockinside Railway. It is so important to get this stuff in at the beginning. And the tramway is one of those types of public transport. It's much more difficult to do it after the event. Far better to incorporate within the initial plans. Yes, this is where the tramway will be able to open up the connectivity, get people to work and all the rest of it. So we see that this is absolutely vital. We're certainly going to be pushing the Electric Development Corporation to ensure that they have that within their, what we're looking at within their plans, because it would be transformational to the development. And this is just the hub. Along our routing, we have a lot of other development sites. We've got on the Essex side at Perfectly on Thames, there's a proposed TV and film studios, but perhaps not quite as large as in Manchester with their TV and film studios. But the idea's there, and we're speaking with the developers with that. In addition, it's worth noting that we've spoken with Ensign Bus, who are the bus operator on the Essex side. We felt it was very important to get the blessing of the bus operators before we started going out with saying this is what we want to do, this is where we want to go. Very, very important to work with the bus operators, and we had the advantage. It's actually quite difficult to take the bus across the Dartford crossing from South Essex to North Kent. So we approached Ensign Bus and we said, well, this is what we're looking to do. Fantastic. That means we don't have to run our bus across the Dartford crossing, getting stuck in all the congestion and traffic caused by the area. So we had their support, and even better on the south side, Arriva, who were running the local BRT scheme, they came to us, and the local MD who knew about these things, and he knew about the tramway in Gordon and what had happened there, he said, look, we really want to support you because our buses are getting caught in the congestion, keep on words. And Arriva came to us, and we spent some reasonable time in various discussions with Arriva until the Bundestag told Deutsche Bahn, can you sell something? And they said, oh, Arriva, let's get rid of all the people. So we were making quite good progress there, but we've got the support of the bus operators on the south side as well, because again, it removes the congestion which causes the bus operators so many problems. So a lot of support there with the bus operators, and that's not always the case in other schemes around the country. Bus operators see tramways as competition rather than complementary and as a way to increase the usage and ridership. But we heard that earlier in terms of systems in Europe where it's not just a case of doing the tram, but it's the rest of the public transport network, it's the buses and getting everything to work in harmony. We're not in competition, it's complementary. You've got to put in a complete system. So that's where we're at with that. Next steps. We submitted our outline business case to the Department for Transport. That's been reviewed. We've got some follow-ups to do, so that's sort of in hand. We have support from the Thames Estuary Growth Board. That's led by Kate Willard. And the Thames Estuary Growth Board effectively is the whole of the Thames Estuary from essentially the Tower of London all the way down to Thanet on the south side and out to Southend on the north side, and with fuzzy boundaries, so I'm told. So it's anything around the estuary, north and south, or right in the middle of it. So very much part of what Thames Estuary Growth Board is supporting. Working with the Department for International Trade and other government departments a bit, the EIS and others, who are helping us to have various discussions and meetings on various aspects. Commercial partners as well. We're in discussions with commercial partners. Our estimated costs, well, it was 800 million. 800 million is sort of what we had come to with a certain amount of optimism bias. It also just happens to be the same figure that's quoted by Transport for London for the extension to Thamesmead for the DNR. Although the tunnelling is a little more expensive than ours, but we've spoken with the guys at Transport for London, compared notes as you do. With the latest issue with costs and where costs are going on in terms of materials, etc., currency fluctuations, who knows where we're going to end up. So we need to revisit the overall cost, but even a 25% increase in that will lose £1 billion. And if we remember that's £1 billion, it's an all-inclusive type of transport. Anybody can use it. We heard earlier, well, if you've got a family and you want to go out somewhere, you leave your car in the garage and you jump on the public transport. Well, you can do that on this. We're looking to go to the Lakeside Shopping Centre as a for example, if you want an evening out there for cinemas and entertainment and so forth, so you just jump on the tram and go. It will be quicker than driving. So even at £1 billion, that compares to the Lower Thames road crossing, which is out there at 8.2 billion before the latest price increases. That would be up to 10,000 million pounds. And in order to use the Lower Thames road crossing, you will need to have access to a car. So it's a non-inclusive form of transport. And guess what? It's 10 times as much as putting in the tramway system. We also have, interestingly, interest from neighbouring constituencies. We had an update meeting at Portcullis House with our sponsoring MP, Stephen Metcalfe, and he said to us, well, the neighbouring constituency, Canvey Island, they're looking at the way to get off of Canvey Island because of what it is. It's an island, you need to have a secondary method of access. Can you have a look at this as well? So we're getting a certain amount of lobbying by MPs to look at other aspects. Now, we've got to say, look, we've got to focus on the first bit before we do the second bit, otherwise nothing will be done. So there's a lot of that going on. Well, what order shall we do this in? But you've got to start somewhere. And if you look at Manchester now, I think they're up to 100 kilometres and 100 tram stops, and that's in a period of, 30 years? Thereabouts. But you've got to start somewhere. And once you're there, and we've heard it before about local mayors, etc., once it's in there and you get people see it, and they say, oh, can we have it over here? Can we get it there? And then there's a possibility of expansion, but we're there at the early stages. Hopefully we've almost got a green light to go ahead on the next part of what we're doing, but we're just almost there. But I wish I had some of that subsidy that's going to the road users for the budgets. 22 billion a year is quite handy to people, to public transport. So that is my final slide. So any questions?